She's sometimes sad, she's sometimes happy. She's doing things to make her life less crappy. Trying a treatment that's new on the scene. Let's sit back and talk about ketamine.
Hey everyone, welcome to Ketamine Insights, a podcast about therapeutic ketamine for mental health by and for patients and the people who love us. Mostly in this episode, we give lots of information about what to expect from a ketamine IV infusion. If you want some background about the different ways to take ketamine for mental health, please check out our very first episode. Now, the problem we run up against when talking about higher dose ketamine experiences, including infusions, is that it's really difficult to describe a psychedelic trip. Like if you've ever had a friend insist on telling you about a dream, it's almost always boring and absurd. Trips can end up sounding pretty meaningless in a similar way, when that's actually usually the opposite of how they feel to the person having them. So instead of trying to describe a trip in normal language, for this episode, I'm really putting myself out there and I read a poem that I wrote a few years ago about infusions and what they feel like and what I've learned from them. Before we start the show, I want to get explicit real quick about why we emphasize patient voices on this podcast. It's not just because Lynn and I are a patient and an ally. It's because we follow Dr. Paul Farmer and others who teach that patients should always be primary in health work. That principle is central to our work in life and on this podcast. So Paul Farmer said, quote, "Illness and poverty are still seen as misfortunes to be addressed by charity instead of injustices to be ended with solidarity," unquote. Hearing patients is the first step toward promoting good health in our families and across the world. Turning to psychedelics, there's a lot of conversation and hype these days, but still several years in, you don't hear much from patients themselves. This is true of mental health in general, and you'll find the same problem with many kinds of illnesses, especially chronic illnesses. You don't hear from patients, and if you do, it's after they've completely recovered from whatever struggle they were facing. As though if you don't heal completely, or if your story is not about overcoming or conquering your illness, then your voice is not valuable. And that, my friends, is a bunch of bullshit. First, patients need to hear from each other. It's incredibly helpful, not just in providing practical tips, but hearing each other's stories is how we come to understand that we're not alone in these experiences. For me, hearing others' stories has been extremely powerful. And second, patients' voices have a lot to teach everyone, from therapists, psychiatrists, families, and the general public. If you haven't already, I'd recommend checking out the Disability Justice Movement. Their teachings are incredibly valuable for all of us. There's two real easy entrees that I'd recommend. If you haven't seen Crip Camp on Netflix, please check it out. It's a really great documentary. And there's also a wonderful podcast called Read My Mind, and that's REID, My Mind, which I highly recommend, and we'll link both of those in the show notes. Zooming back out, that's why we emphasize that this podcast is by and for patients and those who love us. I just want to say one last thing on the topic of patient voices. This is specifically for family and friends. So while podcasts like this one can hopefully help, I'd like to recommend something else too, which is that if you have a loved one with a mental illness and you're not sure what they're going through or what they want, try asking them directly. Even if they're unable to answer in the moment, it will hopefully show them that you care and let them know that you're eager to hear their voice. With that, here is episode number 5. Okay, we're recording. Hey, Lynn, how you doing?
All right. Hey, Molly. I'm doing pretty well. How are you?
I'm good.
Good.
Welcome, everybody, to Ketamine Insights. We're going to do two things today. We're going to do a very straightforward conversation about kind of step-by-step what to expect when you go in for your first infusion, your first ketamine infusion. And then we're going to play a poem that I wrote about the experience of going through a ketamine infusion.
Cool.
So this is just to kind of like clear up any, I don't know, like jitters that you have going into your first infusion. I know I was like very, very nervous. And this is just kind of to take some of the uncertainty out of it.
Yeah.
So,
first time using a psychedelic, I can imagine. It's a little intimidating.
I think one of my big fears was like having a bad, like a quote unquote bad trip. Which is something we can talk about more if we want, that like the real idea about ketamine for depression is that there is no such thing as a bad trip. I can't remember if we've talked about this before. But it might be helpful just to set the stage that like there's no such thing as a bad trip. If your mind is bringing up difficult topics, it's just to process those topics.
Yeah.
So
you could have a hard trip, like a challenging trip that's maybe not fun, but it's not a bad trip.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. So challenging is exactly the word actually that my therapist uses. That like it's challenging. It might not be, it's not fun to work through difficult things, but you come out much, much healthier and happier on the other side. Yeah. And there's this
But that's
idea,
like therapy though, right? I mean, therapy it's not like therapy's like fun and you're laughing and having a great time. Like they say if therapy's working, you should come out of a therapy session like feeling exhausted, right?
Right. You're doing the work, right?
Exactly.
It's called work. And there's also this idea that I kind of have trouble with, but I'm sure it is probably true, that like your mind, or however you want to describe it, your spirit won't bring things up until you're ready to handle them. So don't get too scared because you're not on your own out there. Like you have your own back, and nobody will give you something that you can't handle.
Interesting. Yeah, you're kind of protecting yourself. Interesting.
Yeah. So back to the practical stuff. So like the infusion process begins with an evaluation. So the infusion process starts by finding a clinic, making an appointment. You usually will go in for an evaluation before the day of the infusion. And what'll happen at the evaluation, most likely, is they'll give you a depression questionnaire, which is only like 10 questions long, asking you, have you lost sleep? Have you lost weight? Do you have sad thoughts all the time? Are you overwhelmed? Are you tearful? Things like that. And
this
then
is an evaluation with like a psychologist or a psychiatrist?
It's just a checklist.
Okay.
It's often just
with
like
a therapist, or this is like with the person that's going to administer the infusion?
No, it's usually just a piece of paper.
But like who are you giving it to, or like who are you submitting it to? The therapist?
No, there's usually no therapist working at the clinic, at a ketamine clinic.
So it's whoever is giving you the actual infusion, like the nurse.
Yeah.
Or whoever.
Yeah. So there'll be like a prescriber who's either a nurse, anesthetist, or a physician, or an ER doctor, often an anesthesiologist or an ER doctor.
Okay.
But you're giving the questionnaire. It's just like a paperwork thing. And they just grade it. Yeah. They just say, okay, if you score a 23 or above or whatever it is, then you count as depressed.
Okay. So like, and if you didn't, then they would say, sorry, you don't qualify, even if your therapist had recommended yours.
I wish I knew. I wish I had ever failed that test, or passed it, or however you.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
Okay.
They might then sit down with you and ask you more probing questions.
Yeah. Like,
not
why
sure.
are you really here?
Yeah. Or do you have a depression diagnosis from a psychiatrist or something like that?
Yeah. Okay.
And then they'll go through so then you'll go usually into the room where the infusion happens, or into the doctor's office or the prescriber's office, and they'll take a quote unquote history. My experience is it really just consists of like, have you tried an antidepressant? Yes. Have you tried more than one? Yes or no. And then if your answers, if they deem that you have treatment resistant depression, or if they think you're just depressed, or, in my experience, they're pretty lax about it, actually.
Okay.
And then they'll ask your weight, just because that's how they calculate the dosage. And the point is, they're not going to like delve into your history.
Yeah. Yeah.
So don't think
they're not really prying. Yeah.
They're not therapists. They're not even psychiatrists. They're not going to
sound even like super medicalized, really.
Right. Yeah. They're not. It's just not intense. The most important part of the evaluation is for you to ask them questions, as far as I'm concerned. So you hopefully will get a chance to see the infusion room. And if they don't give you questions within the infusion room, then like go ahead and ask them. I would recommend coming to this evaluation with a list of questions that you've thought of beforehand, at least in your mind, like a couple ideas about what you want to ask about, whatever makes you nervous. Like you don't want the infusion room ideally to be too medical. I've had infusions in rooms with like, the doctors, or the whatever you call that, like cot bed thing that is in a doctor's office, with like the stirrups for the OBGYN inspection, you know?
Like the paper stuff you're laying on top of.
Exactly. The crinkly paper. And
and
then there are other rooms where it's like you get to lay flat down on a couch, or there's like a beautiful lazy boy and candles, and like, so there's a wide range. Yeah.
Okay.
And then, you might want to ask about any health concerns that you have, anything that's making you nervous. Another thing you might want to ask about is like, how long is the infusion? Usually they're about 45 minutes, but it varies. One thing that it's helpful, I think, to give the impression that you're a more thoughtful patient than most, because they'll be on their toes, honestly. Like, I think it's very important to keep healthcare workers on their toes in general, and kind of delve and advocate for yourself. So one thing to ask along those lines is like, will I have time to sit in the room after the infusion if I'm not feeling up to leaving yet? And
because you don't want to be rushed out.
Never.
Like, just had this crazy experience.
You want time to like if you're not going to do an integration session immediately with the therapist and all that, at least be able to take the time, listen to some music, come out of it slowly at your own pace. Another question is like, do they usually add anything to the ketamine? Very often different clinics will add an anti-nausea medication, because sometimes ketamine makes you nauseous. And that
I didn't know that. It's not like ayahuasca where you're probably going to vomit like 5 times or something.
No, right. Where you actually purge. Yeah. No, it's not like that.
Okay. That's good to know.
Thankfully. Yeah. It's not like that. That's very good. Yeah, you're right. That's a very good point. Don't get worried about puking your guts out.
Yeah.
And then I guess another question that a lot of people are nervous about, that you shouldn't feel afraid to ask, is how will I know if it works for me? How and when can I expect to feel different? And know that they can't know that about you, but it's worth hearing what they have to say, what their anecdotal experience is with other patients and things like that. And then just finally, like, what is the regimen? So will you be going every other day for 2 weeks? Will you be going once a week for 4 weeks? How do they do the introduction regimen? And what, if you need maintenance, is it usually every 4 weeks, every 6 weeks, is it as needed? Just to better understand kind of what you're looking at going forward. So those are just a couple questions you want to kind of sit down and think about your own. And then, like, as preparation for the infusion, you want to set an intention. We've already discussed that. Another thing is choosing a playlist. Spotify now has 1 million ketamine playlists, which is great.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. What are those like? Like, what kind of music?
They're like a mix, or not a mix, but like somewhere between kind of spa yoga class music.
Okay.
On the one side, and on the other side, on the other pole, you might have like lo-fi.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Like
that all sounds nice.
Yeah, so it's like a little more active than spa music, and a little less driven usually than like lo-fi music. And so sometimes it is kind of lo-fi. So it's like they don't want you to fall asleep. I mean, you're unlikely to fall asleep, but like, you know, you want to kind of be activated a little bit, but relaxed at the same time, if that makes sense.
Interesting. I feel like I might check those out while I'm just like working or something, you know, those playlists.
Highly recommend.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's helpful too, like if you're going to do 6 infusions, which is a common introductory regimen, pick 4 or 5 or 6 even different playlists.
Yeah.
Because you don't want your mind to get used to the music. You want it to kind of be mixing you up during the infusion.
Yeah. Because like you probably kind of feel differently as the song changes.
Totally.
Yeah.
And there's a couple other tips I have actually about this, which is like, don't, like there's something to be said for the music like surprising you or not, you know, you not knowing the music beforehand. At the same time, there might be things that you don't want in the music. So it might make sense to listen to it beforehand. I think for me, I would much prefer just to listen to it beforehand. Your whole brain isn't going to like know what to expect if you just listen to it one time. Things that I like to avoid are high-pitched noises, just because I'm sensitive to that. Most people are not as sensitive as I am. Maybe it doesn't bother you, but I like to like go through the whole playlist, and if it has high-pitched noises, I'll just skip that song. I'll hide that
like,
song.
Don't want it in there. Okay,
exactly. Doesn't mean you have to throw out the whole list. And then I also don't like English words. Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. That's because you want to be able to be in the zone. It's funny because I remember what this reminds me of is when I was in labor, and I was I really wanted to have with both my babies a natural birth. I was doing this is like I don't want to get sidetracked totally, but basically it was in some ways I don't know, maybe similar to getting into kind of like a meditative state while I was birthing. I was doing hypnobirthing, which we could have a whole podcast about.
Yes,
a whole interesting thing, and it actually was very much about sort of mindfulness in a way, and getting into this kind of mind-body state while you're in active labor. And having a good soundtrack was like really important. And I remember, you know, putting together a playlist, and my husband putting together, you know, a playlist also. We both kind of had put together playlists, and he had put together a playlist at one point that he thought, you know, would kind of contribute to mine. And he had some songs that had, I like some Bob Dylan or something, which I love, but they had lyrics, and I was like, no lyrics. At one point I kind of like came out of my hypnobirthing like zone. I was like, no, I like cannot, like they just kept like, I, you know, as I would hear like those words, like my mind would come out of my zone and like fixate. As I imagine maybe when you're in your like ketamine place, your mind gets distracted as you hear words, and you know, instead of just like a beat, a rhythm, a note, you know, and you're just like, no, my mind needs to be just in the flow of music. Yeah. And I remember just hating that. And I remember those moments in labor. I guess it was only in my first, because I think with the second birth, I was like, no, there will be no songs with lyrics in them. At least nothing in English.
Right.
That my mind will fixate on.
That's
nothing
so
in any language I understand.
Exactly. Yeah. There can be words. I just better not know what they mean.
Yeah, my mind needs to not be distracted by them. Yeah.
And yeah, that's exactly what it feels like. Like you're doing your thing. You're whatever you
in
are.
The
like
flow.
I get images of like pulling ceilings over me sometimes. Like a cozy little blanket. And then all of a sudden it's like you'll have like a guru, you know, like telling you how to think and what to do and how to breathe. And you're like, whoa. Like some of these ketamines, like, and they'll just come out of nowhere. They'll be in the very middle of the playlist. You'll have no idea it's coming, and it's very disruptive. Yeah. And that'd be so funny. Like I could just imagine you turning and being like, ooh, and no, enough. With
Yes. Off.
No lyrics. God, why do you hate me?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, you want this baby to come out or not? Turn this off.
And there's another little tip that I just learned recently about Spotify in particular. It used to like jar me out of the experience when there would be like a stark difference between tracks.
Yeah.
like either rhythm wise or anything. And you'd be in your flow, and it would kind of like make you remember that you're in a room with a needle in your arm and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And you're trying to like be in the moment. And so there's something you can turn up the crossfade in Spotify and have each, and if you turn it all the way up, it's like 12 seconds, I think. And so you can have them kind of artificially, overlap each other.
Which interesting. If you're not like sort of like a DJ would do.
Exactly.
Where they're like fading the songs into each other. Oh, that's cool. Oh, good tip.
And if you're not, like if you're a real music person, because it's not well done, it's just automatically done, it might distract you. But if you're like me, it's great. It's really nice.
Oh, I love that idea. Yeah. That sounds great. Okay. Excellent tip.
Let's see what else. So anyway,
wear comfortable clothes. Nothing that's going to be
my gosh,
itchy.
we're very comfortable clothes.
Yeah. Do they provide a blanket for you?
Often
I
they
feel like
will.
you might want a cozy blanket.
Not nearly enough. They never provide enough blankets.
Okay. Okay. So maybe bring a cozy blanket, cozy socks.
Not only a blanket. I would like. I wear lots of clothes because the infusion bag is full of room temperature liquid, which is much colder than your body.
Yeah. It's like 75 degrees.
Yeah.
It's like 20 degrees colder than your body.
And if you're sitting there for 45 minutes, like, stark still.
Yeah.
And they're pumping 75 degree, you'd get cold. Like you get chilly.
Yeah.
So I actually recommend, like, in addition to lots of clothes and blankets, like I used to take my winter coat and put my feet in the hood. So it was kind of like, it'd be like a sleeping bag for my feet.
Yeah.
But then this is like next level shit. Nowadays, I just bring a hot water bottle.
Oh, that's nice. That sounds cozy.
It's actually very, very, it's a different level of comfort altogether because it makes me feel cared for.
Yeah.
Like, I don't have to create all the heat. Like even with a blanket, right? Like it's keeping your heat in, but you have to create all the heat still. And there's something about like, I'm not, and you like seize up and you're cold and it's not relaxing. And so if like with a hot water bottle, it's like, there's something like providing the warmth for you.
Yeah, sounds lovely. It's like
like
you've got your dog cuddling with you or something.
Totally. Yep. It's like your dog's like sitting on your toes, keeping them warm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Along the same
okay, that's a huge tip. Is like, because if you're not super warm, that would be really annoying. I feel like especially for those of us that get cold easily, that's going to be an issue.
Yeah, I think it affects the experience of the infusion itself.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Similarly, like if you're really hungry, like I wouldn't do it on a full stomach, but you try not to be like really starving because you're just more strung out. If you're not physically comfortable, like your body is a little more uptight,
Yep, absolutely.
No matter what. And I feel like I almost feel like if I'm not comfortable, if I'm not warm, if I'm not like fed, I've had enough water, that kind of simple stuff, then like I feel a little under threat.
Yeah.
And as someone who like has PTSD, struggles with like vigilance and stuff like that, I don't really feel like I can like my spirit can heal, if it feels under threat.
Yeah. You need to feel like, your body is completely relaxed. Yeah.
Take the
Makes
time
sense.
to like, and I really encourage people to like, if they want to put the IV in before you've got your music and before you feel comfortable in the room, just ask for a minute, stand up for yourself, ask for a minute. It's worth it. Be comfortable, set yourself up as best you can.
That's really important. Yeah. I think that's such a huge point. Like you said at the beginning, like advocating for yourself in this experience, like in any medical experience, that is so important. Yeah. Can I have a minute, please? I'm getting comfortable.
And that's it. Like, you might not feel like that's a legitimate medical thing, but it is.
Absolutely.
It is. Okay, so we're in the Lazy Boy. We're comfortable. We've got the hot water bottle. We've got a couple blankets. They'll often provide a blindfold.
Okay.
Like one of those sleep masks.
Okay. Blind sounds creepy when you call it a blindfold. Like, that honestly sounds creepy. But yeah, let's say, what's a sleep mask? Let's call it a sleep mask.
Yes,
they're
sleep mask.
They're not taking you hostage.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'll have mask. And you can bring one if you want, but yeah, they'll usually provide one.
Okay.
There are fancy ones. I have heard about people wanting. Some people have a different experience during ketamine if they can open their eyes.
Yeah.
But you don't want to see the room at the same time.
Yeah.
This is a weird thing, but so they make eye masks where you're in complete darkness, but you actually can open your eyelids.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I know what you mean. There's like space to open your eyes, but you only see blackness.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And that somehow for these people, I've tried it and I didn't notice any difference, but I've heard people say things like they feel more in the experience because their eyes are open.
Yeah, but they're not seeing what's like actually the room they're physically in right there.
Yeah, to bring them out of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway,
that actually sounds kind of nice. Huh? Interesting. I'm imagining.
Yeah, okay. You can just
but you're just like Amazon, you just want your eye. You don't need to have your eyes open. You're just eyes closed.
They're closed. It's fine. Yeah, and then like have your comfy big headphones, or they'll usually offer you headphones as well if you want.
Okay.
And then the tech will often. So it's not the physician that puts the IV in. It's usually just a technician.
Mm-hmm.
They'll put the IV in, ask you if you have any questions, and often the prescribing physician will be the one who has to, or the nurse anesthetist or whoever it is, will have to actually turn on the ketamine.
Okay.
At least that's the way it is in Illinois. I think that's the way it is most places. And then you chill out, just like take a couple deep breaths. It usually takes 3 to 5 minutes to like start to kick in. And then your job is
that's pretty fast, really. Relax. 3 to 5 minutes.
Yeah, it's longer if you're taking it in any other way, but the IV gets right to you.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah. So just kind of practically, those are kind of the tips to prepare yourself. For the actual day of, and then after the first one, you'll know a lot more about what you like, what you don't like, how to, if your headband or your eye mask, is that what we said? Sleep mask?
Sleep mask. Yeah. Eye mask, sleep mask. Yeah. Not a blindfold.
Is too tight or something like that. Yeah. You could go to Target, get a new, whatever it is, like you can adjust for the next one. And just don't be afraid to prioritize your own comfort.
Yes, of course.
And then what we're going to do now is just play a poem that kind of gets more into like the actual experience of the infusion itself and kind of how wacky and powerful that can be. And I think that's it. Did we cover everything, Lynn?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, you're the expert on this, having been through it, but I think that your poem will really help to touch on more of the experience. So for all of the listeners, poem by the one and only Molly Dunn, A Room in Chicago.
A Room in Chicago. Thanks so much, Lynn.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
A Room in Chicago by Molly Dunn. There's a room in Chicago near the intersection of Clark and Belmont, a neighborhood that in my childhood teemed with punks and artists. There was leather and spikes and a place we called Punkin' Donuts. Pierced teenagers squatted on curbs for reasons both obvious and misunderstood. Now, this neighborhood hosts a Target and a Starbucks and a room where I've undergone more than 30 ketamine infusions for treatment-resistant depression. In a recliner, built like all recliners for men, with electrodes on my chest and a needle in my arm, I lay all the way back. A million blankets, headphones, eye mask, Buddha statues, Kleenex. My therapist for now sits in silence in the corner. He does nothing except be present, which honors and confounds me. Many times I've smiled while the tech, I call her Sharon the bad phlebotomist, pokes, shakes her head and pokes again. I've winced and nodded while she tells me again how lucky I am to have such treatment, to get such care. In that room, I have learned that I am a good person. I've pulled ceilings over me like blankets and zoomed through multicolored tunnels of insight and meaning. I've wept uncontrollably. I've come back to a reality in which my partner had left, devastated that here in real life, I was fighting all alone. I've come back to a reality where I am so sad that I cannot function, where I must remember not to move because they're pumping something into my body to fix me, and where it's not working. A reality where my mind and heart and gut are riddled with diseases doctors don't understand. In this room, I've also learned that my feelings of separateness are an illusion. I've learned that love travels through walls and across great distances, and it even travels through time, leaving me nourished and never all alone. One infusion, having read Audre Lorde the night before, I learned that shame comes from internalizing large social problems, that shedding shame is a beautiful, revolutionary act, that living out loud is a blessing to us and to our communities, Umi says. I have seen that my experience is powerful, but it is not unique. In this room, I have danced with my friend Sagar at a nightclub in Oxford, jived with my cousin Martina in an Irish pub, waltzed with Grandma at the Irish Heritage Centre, where Grandpa, of course, did the pipe work. I have sighed, knowing that I can do without. I've pleaded for certainty. I've rejected acceptance. I've accepted love as the answer to every question. Love is the thing that God is made up of, and I've come to know that love is what I'm made up of too. I've been thrilled to hear Lizzo and Bill Withers cheering me on, and I've mourned. I've mourned the family I'm now too afraid to create. The woman whose last words to me were, "Are you going to be okay?" I've grieved the abilities I once held sacred, to serve, to work, to think, to read, and even to remember. I've had fleeting moments in this room when I felt healthy. I've been bruised and talked over and tucked in and listened to. I've been given the time and space and the care to feel a love beyond measure. I've thought, and I've almost said, I do know, Sharon. I know that I'm the luckiest girl in the world. Recently, driving away from this room on a Friday, up Belmont and away from Cubs traffic, Mom asked if I wanted to stop for coffee or ice cream. Both, I declared, inspired and sure. Let's not ration our joy. Ketamine Insights is hosted by Lynn Schneider and me, Molly Dunn. All of our music is by Solid State Symphony. If you've become a regular listener, we have a Patreon page where you can help us keep the lights on. Go to patreon.com and search for Ketamine Insights. Finally, please take a moment, think of someone who you know who might enjoy this podcast and shoot them a text. Thank you so much. See you next week.